What's up guys, welcome to Programming Tutorials. This series of videos is designed to help get you programming in C#. I am self-taught, so there will be a few things that might not be best practice or industry standard, but it will give you the ability to make programs and applications for your own use. If you want a more comprehensive course, I recommend you go check out the Microsoft Academy. There's lots of really in-depth tutorials and it goes into the ins and outs, which we probably won't be covering in this tutorial. So let's get on with it. I'm going to start right from the beginning with the installation and configuration of Visual Studio, which is what we'll be using to make our programs. This might be very basic to begin with, but I want to make sure we cover all bases from the very beginner. We definitely will get more technical a bit later on in the series, so stick with us. So we're just going to open up Internet Explorer and go and get our download file from Microsoft's website. Just googling download Visual Studio. I'll put the link in the description so you can go straight there. But you want the free download of Visual Studio Community. Download should start, just click run when it pops up. So depending on how fast your PC is, this might take a while to load, or just sit and let it load in the background there. I am running on a virtual machine at the moment, so it's been a bit slower than normal. So once it's loaded up, there's quite a few options that you can choose from here, depending on what you want. You feel free to go and install it all. It's quite large, but I say I'm on a virtual machine. It's not very high powered, so I'm just going to choose the two at the top, which is the .NET Desktop Development and the Universal Windows Platform Development. I actually think we only need the .NET Desktop Development, but I'm going to install the top two, just in case we need it for future videos. So again, this next bit can take quite a while to complete, so I'm just going to sit there, let it do its thing, and we'll come back for the next step. So once we told Visual Studio to launch, we'll popped up and it's asking us to sign in. I'll hit not now, maybe later, because it's going to want me to put my account details in. Got a couple of theme options. I'm just going to leave it with the standard. Development settings, I always change to C#. If you want to follow along with this, I recommend you do the same, just so we've got the same settings, shortcuts, and things like that. So start Visual Studio. Okay, so once Visual Studio has opened, you agree with the home page. We can click on Create New Project here. So this loads up with all of the available projects that we've got. We're going to start with Windows Forms apps. I think they're the easiest way to get started. WPF apps are kind of the newer version of Windows Forms, but make no mistake about it, Windows Forms are still very widely used across the world. So that's what we start with. Give our app a name down here. So at the moment it's Windows Forms app. We'll just call this My First App. Location you can leave as default, or you can organise it in your own way. Feel free to change that. I'm just going to leave it as default. And press OK. So this will build us a base solution that contains all of the files we require to run our first application. Okay, so we now have our first application that is a Windows Forms app. We can start this up here by pressing the start button. It will load a very basic app which does effectively nothing at the moment, but it shows that we've got everything installed and you do have an application that you can run on your machine. Okay, so there is our application. It's called Form 1 at the moment. As I say, there's no functionality whatsoever. There are a lot of debugging and diagnostic tools over here and some down here as well. I don't know if you can see my mouse in the recording actually, so I'll click around the screen. I know you can see that. We will go into these a lot later on in the tutorial, so don't worry about them just for now. So you can stop the application by either hitting close up there or the stop button up there. Just close it down and it will take us back so we can develop on it. So a few other things to note. On the left hand side you have data sources, which we won't be covering just yet, and you've also got your toolbox. I'm going to click that. So your toolbox is all of the controls that you have available to use in Windows Forms. So if we just expand out the all Windows Forms controls here, you can see all the stuff that you'd expect. See, some of them you might not be too familiar with, but if we just see, I'm just going to drag a button on. We all know what buttons do, we don't need to go into that in too much detail. Now over towards the right hand side, up here you've got your Solution Explorer. So we'll go into the construction of how a solution works a bit later on perhaps, but for now all you need to know is you've got your form here, which is what we're viewing. So if I save that and close it down, if I ever need to get that back up, I can just double click on my form and it brings that straight back up. You also have your program.cs file. Again, this is very important, but for the moment we'll just acknowledge that it's there. We'll go into what it does a bit later on in some more tutorials. Down here you have your properties box. We're going to spend a lot of time down here, so I won't spend too much time on it just now. But just know that's the place where we're going to be changing a lot of the properties of controls and forms themselves. So you see up here the title is Form 1. If we go down to here, we can see the text that's currently set to a value of Form 1. So if we change this to My Application, if I could type correctly, and press enter or click off of it, you'll see that the property, which is the text of our Form 1, has changed to My Application. Okay, so we've got our application, we've got a very basic understanding of what Visual Studio looks like and the various components of it, toolbox, the properties and the Solution Explorer. How do we make our application actually do something? So for that, what we're going to do is I'm going to drag a text box onto the form, if my mouse would work. So one of the things you can do up here, you've got search toolbox, and I'm just going to type in text box or just text, and you see that you've got all Windows Forms Control text box. I'm just going to place that on there. So now we've got a button and a text box. How do we make them interact? How do we make them do something? Well, the first thing that's important to note is each of these controls has individual properties for itself. So we can see here this control, the text box up here, it's called text box 1. It's got size properties, tab properties, and some various other things we can change. If we scroll all the way to the top, you can see the name of it. So here, I'm just going to call it txt my text. So the idea of naming these, generally speaking, I stick to the first part of the name to give me an indication of what it is. So this is a text box, so I've started with txt, and then the rest of it gives you some meaning as to what the purpose of that is. I'm going to go over to the button and I'm going to change the name of the button to BTN, which is what I use for short for button, most people do, and I'm going to say button change text. So that's now the name of my button. If I scroll down to here, and this really just gets you used to the properties of each of the controls you've got. So you've got the text here, just going to change that to change text box. And you can see that the button's clearly not big enough to show all of that, so you can resize them, just drag that out. Doesn't look all too pretty at the moment, doesn't have to. So we've changed a lot of properties, we still haven't actually done anything. In order to make the button do something clever, there's a couple of different ways we can do it. The easiest way, I find, is if you double click on the button. What it will do is it will go into the code of the form. So let's try that. So that's now loaded the code that is behind our form. We won't go into too much detail of what's in there. There's a lot of stuff that we don't need for the moment. What we're concentrating on is this little section of code here, lines 20 to 23, which said private void btn change text. That's what we called our control, and you've got underscore click. Now what this means is the underscore click is a reference to the action being taken on the control that we're doing. So any code that we write inside here is going to be actioned whenever you click the button. There are other ways to do this. There are other actions you can have, which I will show you shortly. So what we're going to do is we're going to write a little bit of text just to input some value into our text box. In order to do that, I need the control's name. We go back to the form, we'll click on our text box. What did I call it? I called it txt my text. So if I simply start writing txt, what should happen is Visual Studio's IntelliSense is saying we recognise you've got a control on that, so you've got txt my text. I don't need to finish typing that, I'll just press tab and that brings up the control. If I then put a full stop, it then brings up various properties that I can access for this control. Now if we go back to our form here, we can see that one of the properties is called text and it's blank. So if I go back to here and I say my text.text, that means I'm accessing the text property of the text box. If I put equals, I can set it to a value. Now in order to put a string value in C#, it needs to be inside double quotes. So I'll just put one double quote, but Visual Studio has automatically enclosed it in two for me there. So I'll put, this is my text. And with Visual Studio C# or C#.net, every single line of code should end with a semicolon, except in special circumstances, which we will go through. So that's it. That's all I need to write for this. I'm just going to hit the Save All button up here. Just saves everything, and then I'm going to hit the Start button. So this should build our application. As you can see down here, it's saying build started. Yours will probably be much quicker than this. But what will happen is that's compiling all of the code into the .NET framework, and then it will show me the application on screen. Okay, so I now have the application on screen, and I've got our button there and our text box there. Now, if I click that button, you can see what's happened is it's gone and put "this is my text" into the text box. Nice and simple, but how can we dig a little bit deeper and understand what's really going on behind the scenes? So I'm just going to go to Stop Application here. And what I'm going to do is on this line here, on line 22, I'm going to click to the left of it here, and what you will see is a red dot comes up and it highlights the text in red. This is referred to as a breakpoint. It's going to be extremely useful when debugging your code. What it means is I can step through the code line by line and figure out what it's actually doing. So I'm going to hit Start again, and I'm going to press the Change Text Box button. And you can see this time what's happened is the application has disappeared, and it's not just instantly set the value to "this is my text." It's come up with this yellow highlight in here, which is telling me that that's the line of code the program is on at the moment. So what I can do, this is very simple. If I hit F10, it executes that bit of code. Here's some debugging information about how long it took to run there. Now that I've executed that single line of code, I will hit continue, and my form comes back and it's now executed that bit of code. So I think that's pretty much where I'm going to leave this first episode. It's a good introduction. It gets Visual Studio set up and it gets your first application running. This was quite simple, so we will cover some more advanced stuff later on. The only thing I will do, I'm just going to flick back at the top here. You can see I've got two tabs. I've got form1.cs and form1.cs design. If I go back to that, it brings me back to the design page here. A couple of things that I'm going to leave to kind of tease you, to encourage you to go and play around yourself. You know, you're not going to break anything at this stage. The worst case scenario is you go back and you start a new project yourself. So I've clicked on a button, so I click off it, I click on it, and I can see that I'm clicked on it by the fact that I've got this surrounding here. Now over here we've got our properties, so you've got the text and it says change text box, that's what we changed earlier. We've got a little lightning bolt here. If you hover over it, it says events. If I click on that, what you can see in the click event, you've got the btn change text underscore click, which if we flick over to the code tab here, we can see is the name of that. So we can see that's how it's linked. So that's a private void called btn change text underscore click, and we can see that the click event here is linked to that. So what I want to do now is leave you with a little bit of a tease. I'm going to add some new events to this using some different methods, and I'm going to write some code, but I'm not going to explain it in this video. I'm going to leave it for you to interpret my code, interpret my actions, and see if you can understand what's going on and replicate it in your own environment. So I'll go nice and quiet now. I will let the video play out with this little bit of a tease, and you can work out how I've done it. I hope you've enjoyed this first tutorial. Be sure to check in, subscribe to the channel. There will be more episodes going on later on with some more advanced stuff. So I'll catch you next time. Thanks guys.